It's 3 in the morning, the engine is off. You're falling, silently, through darkness. Below you, a German camp. Searchlights sweeping, flak guns pointed at the sky, soldiers who will shoot anything that moves. You have no gun, no radio, no radar, no parachute. Under each wing, one bomb. The only sound is air moving through canvas and wire, a soft whoosh in the night, like something unseen passing overhead. You are 19 years old. This is your 11th mission tonight, and in 60 seconds, you will either release those bombs and restart an engine that may or may not catch, or you will be on fire over enemy territory with nowhere to go. What does it feel like to be this alive? This is a story that most history books skipped, not because it wasn't important, because the people who lived it were the wrong gender. And when the war ended, a government decided that made them inconvenient. In 1941, the Soviet Union was losing World War II, not slowly, catastrophically. Within 6 months of the German invasion, the Wehrmacht had killed or captured 4 million Soviet soldiers. They were 30 miles from Moscow. The country was in free fall. Into that catastrophe stepped a woman named Marina Raskova, the most famous aviator in the Soviet Union, who looked at a military drowning in its own disaster and said something nobody expected. She said, "Let the girls fly." What followed was 3 years of bombing missions, 23,000 sorties, and a nickname the Germans gave them out of fear, not mockery. By the end of this story, you will understand why a government that desperately needed these women was so desperate to erase them afterward, and why that erasure is still happening in 100 different ways right now. Marina Raskova started as an opera singer. Then an ear infection took her voice, so she pivoted, trained in chemistry, then aviation. In 1933, she became the first woman in the Soviet Union to earn a professional air navigator diploma. In 1938, she navigated a record-breaking non-stop flight from Moscow to the Soviet Far East, 26 hours, 5,947 kilometers. When the aircraft ran low on fuel over Siberia, Raskova did something extraordinary. The nose compartment had no interior access. The only way out was the hatch, at altitude. Over frozen wilderness, she bailed out. Alone, in the Siberian forest. Without food, without water. She survived 10 days before rescuers found her. Stalin gave her the Hero of the Soviet Union Award, one of the first women ever to receive it. So when Operation Barbarossa began in June 1941, and women across the Soviet Union flooded military recruitment offices, they were turned away. Knit socks, they were told. Stay home. War is for men. But they had Marina Raskova's address. Tens of thousands of letters poured in. Women who had been flying since they were 15, navigation instructors, aerobatic champions, aviation club members from every city in the USSR. Raskova had a direct line to Stalin. She used it. On October 8, 1941, Stalin signed the order. 3. All-female aviation regiments. The only time in the history of any major power that women were officially deployed in frontline combat aviation. But here's what nobody talks about. The plane they were given to fly. The women received their aircraft in January 1942, and they were insulted. The Polikarpov Po-2 was not a warplane. It was a 1920s crop duster, a training aircraft. Fabric and wood, open cockpits, no armor, no guns, no radar, top speed, 94 miles per hour. That's barely faster than a motorcycle. The German Messerschmitt Bf 109, The fighter they would be flying against had a top speed of 354 miles per hour. But here's the part nobody expected. The Bf-109 had a minimum controllable airspeed of approximately 100 miles per hour. Below that, it stalled. The Po-2's top speed was 94 miles per hour. The Germans literally could not slow down enough to shoot them. If a Bf-109 pilot tried to match the Po-2's speed to line up a shot, his aircraft would stall and fall out of the sky. The most obsolete aircraft in the Soviet inventory was almost impossible to intercept by Germany's best fighters. There was more. The Po-2 was too small for German radar systems, too low, no radios. So, German radio detection was useless. They flew at 600 to 1,200 meters, below effective anti-aircraft artillery ranges. The women had not been handed an insult. They had been handed a ghost. And at night, with the engine off, they were invisible. Here is how they did it. 3 planes would approach the target in formation. 2 would fly close enough to draw the searchlights. On purpose, blinding, exposed, while German gunners tracked those 2 planes, desperately trying to calculate a firing solution on tiny, slow, maneuvering targets. The 3rd pilot cut her engine. Silence, just wind through wires. That soft whoosh in the darkness. She would glide. Engine off, unpowered, falling in a controlled descent toward the target. No engine noise for the Germans to track. No heat signature. No radar return. At 600 meters, she released the bombs. Then she restarted the engine, which might catch on the first pull or might not, and climbed away. If the engine didn't catch, she had very few options. The Germans who survived encounters with this tactic wrote home about it. The sound, that soft whoosh, overhead before everything exploded. German soldiers developed a Pavlovian response. Any soft sound in the night, any rustle that wasn't wind, scrambling for cover, waking from sleep in a cold sweat. The Germans gave them a name, Nachthexen, night witches, and the German High Command offered an automatic Iron Cross, one of the Third Reich's highest military honors, to any pilot who shot one down. That is how afraid they were. Let me tell you who these women actually were. Nadia Popova was 21 when she started flying combat missions. Before the war, she enrolled in a gliding school at 15. Without telling her parents, after watching a small plane land near her town, she completed her first solo flight at 16. When Germany invaded, she was standing on a road watching German pilots strafe civilian refugees. Women, children, running. She could see the smiling faces of the pilots. Her family home was seized and turned into a Gestapo station. She flew 852 combat sorties on her best night. Over Poland in 1944, she flew 18 missions before dawn. 18. Irina Sabrova flew 1,008 sorties, more than anyone else in the regiment. 1,008 nights over enemy lines in an open cockpit with no parachute. Their instruments, a compass, paper maps, a ruler, a flashlight, a stopwatch, their winter uniform, a man's flight suit, sized for a man. The boots were enormous to fill them, and to keep their feet from freezing at -40 degrees, they tore strips from bed sheets and stuffed them inside. Between missions, they did needlework. They painted flowers on the sides of their planes. Because lipstick was unavailable, they used their red navigation pencils as eyeliner and lip color. They were at war. They were 20 years old. They were the most feared pilots the Germans encountered on the Eastern Front. On January 4, 1943, 8 months after the Night Witches flew their first combat mission, Marina Raskova was leading 2 aircraft to a new operational airfield. A blizzard closed in near Saratov. Her P-2 bomber flew into the ground. She was 30 years old. She never flew a single combat mission. The woman who argued these women into existence, who chose every one of them personally, who spent months compressing years of training into weeks, pushing them until they were ready for this. She never saw what they became. Stalin gave her the first state funeral of World War II. Her ashes were placed in the Kremlin wall. The pilots who remained flew that night, because the war did not stop. Without their founder, without their protector, without the only person who had the direct line to Stalin to keep the regiment funded, supplied, defended against critics who still wanted to send them home, they flew anyway. And in February 1943, the Soviet military gave the regiment the Guards designation, the highest combat honor in the Red Army. The name change was official. The 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment became the 46th Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment. The girls they had tried to send home were now peers of the best units in the Red Army. 3 years, 1,100 consecutive nights, 23,672 combat sorties, 3,000 tons of bombs dropped, 17 river crossings destroyed, 9 railways damaged or destroyed, 26 warehouses, 12 fuel depots, 176 armored vehicles, 23 members awarded Hero of the Soviet Union, the USSR's highest military honor. And this number, 32, of the 261 women who served in the regiment, only 32 were killed, 12%. Think about what that means. They flew 23,000 sorties in unarmored fabric biplanes. No parachutes for the first 2 years. Open cockpits over the most heavily defended positions on the Eastern Front. 12%. Male regiments in similar roles, flying similar harassment bombing missions, lost substantially higher percentages. The Night Witches were not lucky. They were skilled, disciplined, and tactically brilliant. They had mastered an aircraft nobody else believed in, for missions nobody else would attempt, in conditions that would have broken most people. And there's one more number. One night. In 3 years, there was only one night that the regiment did not fly, when German ace Joseph Kosiak caught them during a mission and shot down 3 or 4 planes in a single night. The next night they were back. May 1945. Victory Day. The war was won. Every regiment that had served was represented at the Victory Parade in Moscow, except the Night Witches. The official reason: their Po-2 planes were too slow to fly in the formation flyover. The same planes that had been too slow for German fighters to shoot down, too slow for German radar to detect. The planes that had flown 1,100 nights over enemy lines without stopping. Now they were too slow for the parade. The women who had been useful, who had been needed, who had been deployed when the Soviet Union had nothing left to deploy, were now inconvenient. The war was over. The state needed women to go home, have children, rebuild the population. It needed its mythology of male victory to be clean and simple. Female veterans were pressured not to discuss their service. Many couldn't get jobs in civilian aviation. Their combat experience was deemed irrelevant. One pilot, Marina Rekobolskaya, who had served as a staff officer, later said, "In peacetime, a woman can only fly for sport. Otherwise, how can one combine a career with a family and with maternal happiness?" That's not a quote from a critic of the regiment. That's a quote from someone who had served in it. That's how thoroughly the Erasure worked. For decades, female veterans were denied pensions. Their service was not recognized in official military histories. The Guards Regiment that had earned 23 heroes of the Soviet Union flew no sorties in the history books. There is an irony at the heart of this story that I can't stop thinking about. The Germans called them witches to dehumanize them. Supernatural creatures, not real women, beyond human. The Soviet government, after the war, used the opposite logic to erase them. They were too human, too female. Too much a reminder that the mythology of male sacrifice wasn't the whole story. Named as monsters by their enemies, erased as women by their own side. Both moves accomplished the same thing, removing them from the official record. The gap between what they did, 23,000 sorties, 1,100 nights, no parachutes, and how little they appear in official histories is not an accident. It is a document. It tells you exactly who got to be a hero and who got to decide. Nadia Popova lived to be 91. She died in 2013. In interviews, she said something that stayed with me. I sometimes stare into the blackness and close my eyes. I can still imagine myself as a young girl, up there in my little bomber. And I ask myself, Nadia, how did you do it? 852 missions, 18 in one night. I think about that question a lot. Not just how she did it, but what it means to give everything, to fight for something so completely, for 3 years with nothing to protect you, for a country that would later pretend you didn't exist. What would you have done? If you had been turned away from the recruitment office, been told to go home and had Marina Raskova's address, would you have written a letter? And if you had written it, and flown the missions, and survived, and then been told to stay home from the parade, what would you have done with that? We began in the silence. The engine off, the glide through darkness. That silence was their weapon, their invisibility, the thing that made them impossible to kill. But there is another kind of silence, the silence of official records that don't mention them, the silence of a parade that didn't call their names, the silence of pension offices that said, "We have no record of your service." That silence is not a weapon. That silence is a choice. In 2013, Nadia Popova died, and the world had to Google who she was. In 2014, a heavy metal band called Sabaton put her story on an album, and millions of people heard about the Night Witches for the first time. History doesn't have a memory. People do. We decide what to remember. We decide who counts. The women of the 46th Guards flew 23,672 sorties. They are still flying every time someone tells this story. And yet, history's habit of using people and then erasing them did not begin with the Night Witches, and it did not end with them. Across the world, around the same time, a different group of workers were proving something that would change everything we think we know about who gets used and who gets protected. They worked in factory rooms that glowed with an eerie green light. Their hair shimmered, their teeth shone in the dark. They were told the substance they worked with was healthy, beautifying. Some of them even painted it on their lips. Their names were Grace, Catherine, Irene, Edna. And when their bones began to crumble, and the company that employed them saw the x-rays, executives quietly filed the results away and said nothing. The story of the Radium Girls isn't just a story about corporate greed. It's about what happens when the people being used finally decide to stop being silent.